Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: U.S. in policy switch, urges humanitarian pauses in Gaza. As debate rages over the legality of Israel's actions in Gaza, how far is too far? Analysis: does Israel's land operation mean captives won't be released? Former NATO commander warns of ladder of escalation between U.S. Iran. Iran's proxies fire back after U.S. airstrikes. U.S. in policy switch, urges humanitarian pauses in Gaza. Washington Post. After weeks of declining to back growing international calls for humanitarian pauses in Israeli airstrikes to allow a steady flow of aid to enter Gaza, permit American and foreign citizens to exit into Egypt and facilitate the release of hostages, the Biden administration is now fully in favor of them and is pressing Israel to agree. David Satterfield, President Biden's special envoy to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, has been in Israel this week seeking progress on both aid and egress to Egypt. But according to U.S., United Nations, Egyptian and Israeli officials, many of whom spoke only on the condition of anonymity amid a welter of finger-pointing among those involved, no substantive progress has been made. The administration's public promotion this week of humanitarian pauses came after what one U.S. official said was a lot of the groundwork in private communications. As debate rages over the legality of Israel's actions in Gaza, how far is too far? The Toronto Star. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas has raised questions about the legality of Israel's actions in self-defense. The United Nations Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has claimed that Israel has violated international humanitarian law, although the US and Canada support Israel's right to defend itself. Both countries have called for humanitarian pauses to allow temporary breaks in hostilities so that humanitarian assistance can be delivered. However, critics argue that Hamas would not adhere to any ceasefire agreement. Many are questioning whether Israel's intense bombardment of Gaza since the October 7 attacks by Hamas has been proportionate, given the high number of civilian casualties. According to the Associated Press, over 7,300 Palestinians have been killed, including over 2,900 children. Israeli officials claim that Hamas killed 1,400 Israelis, including civilians, soldiers, and hostages. Israel argues that it does not target hospitals, but instead conducts surgical bombings of legitimate Hamas military targets, and that Hamas launches rockets from within residential areas, using Palestinian civilians as human shields. The Israeli government believes that international law does not oblige it to provide humanitarian assistance, although it is doing what it can to facilitate aid. Israel has accused Hamas of stealing fuel from UN storage facilities, preventing the free movement of people within Gaza, and firing rockets from bases near schools and hospitals. The IDF and Israeli officials claim that any violations of international law, war crimes, or atrocities are committed by Hamas. Analysis: does Israel's land operation mean captives won't be released? Al Jazeera. As the conflict in Gaza continues, there have been rumors circulating that Hamas is about to release all hostages it is holding, which would lead to an end to the war. These rumors are based on unverifiable claims and have spread through social networks and media outlets. The claim of a hostage release to end the war does pass initial scrutiny and appears possible and plausible. It would satisfy the wishes of Western officials who have been trying to secure the safe return of their nationals. It would also allow Hamas to claim a clear success and become a partner in negotiations, even if it remains an enemy. Qatar is acting as an intermediary in the negotiations, but other parties from the region, such as Iran, could also be involved. Iran, a sworn enemy of Israel, has refrained from any threatening military moves during the conflict and would stand to gain influence and respect if it helped reduce tensions and stop the spread of the war. The potential hostage release would also put Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in an untenable position and could lead to calls for his political and legal responsibility once the fighting stops. Former NATO commander warns of ladder of escalation between US, Iran. Yahoo! Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander James Stavridis has warned of a ladder of escalation between the US and Iran. He assessed the chances of a direct conflict between the two countries as low, but noted that there was still a 10% chance which he described as uncomfortably high. Stavridis explained that if Iran were to take military action against the US would retaliate, drawing Hezbollah into the conflict and potentially leading to a wider conflict in the region. Iran's proxies fire back after US airstrikes. New York Times. US fighter jets bombed facilities used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and its proxies in Syria, before the proxies fired back by launching an attack drone at US forces in western Iraq. The drone was shot down, causing no injuries or damage. The US retaliatory strikes were important, but not enough to deter Iran and its proxies, according to Republican critics and air power advocates. The US military has sent extra warplanes and aircraft carriers to the region to prevent a regional conflict with Iran and its proxies. Federal prosecutor to Congress: I didn't hinder Hunter Biden probe. Yahoo! The top federal prosecutor in Los Angeles confirmed to congressional investigators that he declined to bring tax charges against Hunter Biden last year, but insisted his decision did not hamper the probe into the president's son. Martin Estrada, the U.S. Attorney for Central California, who made those remarks in closed-door testimony, told the investigators that the Delaware prosecutors running the Hunter Biden probe have long been able to file charges in California. U.S. assault rifle ban unlikely after Maine shooting, despite Congressman's shift. Reuters. The latest mass shooting in the United States, which killed 18 people in Maine, prompted U.S. Representative Jared Golden, whose constituents died in the massacre, to reverse his opposition to a ban on assault-style weapons. However, President Joe Biden's push to reinstate a ban of such guns has been a non-starter for Republicans who control the House of Representatives and back gun rights. Golden, a conservative Democrat, on Thursday said he had opposed a ban out of false confidence that his community was above such violence. Opinion polls show a majority of Americans favor tighter gun restrictions such as background checks and red flag laws, aimed at keeping guns out of the hands of people believed to be a danger to themselves or others, but are more evenly split on assault-style rifle bans. Untangling the great policy mess of Canada's innovation problem. The Globe and Mail. Canada's lack of investment in independent research and poor productivity are hindering its economic growth and global competitiveness, according to an op-ed by David Naylor and Stephen Tupp in the Globe and Mail. The authors argue that Canada's focus on short-term economic impact from research has led to a neglect of fundamental research that could drive long-term innovation and productivity. They call for increased support for graduate students and early career researchers and a comprehensive, pan-Canadian strategy to enhance competition, productivity, and domestic business innovation. The authors also recommend the creation of an independent advisory body to provide strategic policy advice on science, research, and innovation, and to evaluate and report on the support for and performance of these activities in Canada. This week in Bidenomics, more good news for voters to dismiss. Yahoo! Consumer confidence in the U.S. has fallen despite the economy's strong performance following the pandemic. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey has shown that confidence is now at similar levels to those seen during the Great Recession, even though the unemployment rate is just 3.8%. Consumers are said to be concerned about inflation, but despite rates having fallen sharply, confidence has worsened. Maine locks down as police hunt Lewiston shooting suspect. Telegraph. Police in the U.S. state of Maine are continuing their search for a man who is suspected of shooting 18 people. Robert Card, a 40-year-old Army reservist, is accused of opening fire at a restaurant and bowling alley in Lewiston. Card has been on the run for almost 48 hours, and police are searching woodland and small towns in the area. The motive for the shootings is still unknown, but there is speculation that Card may have targeted members of the deaf community, as 4 of the 8 people killed at the restaurant were deaf. Who is Dean Phillips, Biden's new Democratic primary challenger? Yahoo! Minnesota Representative Dean Phillips has announced he will challenge President Biden for the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination. Phillips, a former CEO and one of the wealthiest members of Congress, said he is running for pragmatic reasons and is not opposed to Biden. However, his campaign is seen as delusional by one strategist, with President Biden polling strongly among potential Democratic primary voters. Phillips is not expected to attack the president with much ferocity, but has distanced himself from Biden on key policy issues. U.S. urges Israel against Gaza ground invasion, pushes surgical campaign. Washington Post. The Biden administration is urging Israel to rethink its plans for a major ground offensive in the Gaza Strip, and instead to opt for a more surgical operation using aircraft and special operations forces carrying out precise, targeted raids on high-value Hamas targets and infrastructure, according to 5 U.S. officials familiar with the discussions. Administration officials have become highly concerned about the potential repercussions of a full ground assault, the officials said, and they increasingly doubt that it would achieve Israel's stated goal of eliminating Hamas. They also are concerned that it could derail negotiations to free nearly 200 hostages, particularly as diplomats think they have made significant advances in recent days to free a number of them, potentially including some Americans, one of the officials said. The Biden administration also is worried that a ground invasion could result in numerous casualties among Palestinian civilians as well as Israeli soldiers, potentially triggering a dramatic escalation of hostilities in the region, the officials said. U.S. officials think a targeted operation would be more conducive to hostage negotiations, less likely to interrupt humanitarian aid deliveries, less deadly for people on both sides, and less likely to provoke a wider war in the region, the officials said. After 5-year absence, China's foreign minister visits Washington. Diplomat. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has visited the United States for the first time in over 5 years, meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and President Joe Biden. The visit is seen as an opportunity to lay the groundwork for a potential trip by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Wang struck a conciliatory tone, highlighting the need for dialogue between the two countries to stabilize their relationship. No major deliverables or breakthroughs were expected from the visit. The U.S. State Department stated that the two sides discussed areas of difference and explored areas of cooperation. Trump shows his House sway in election of Mike Johnson as Speaker. Financial Times. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has claimed credit for the election of Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House of Representatives. While some accuse Trump of exaggerating his role in Johnson's election, it does highlight his continued influence over Capitol Hill. Trump is the frontrunner for the Republican Party's presidential nomination in 2024, and he has the power to make or break political careers on Capitol Hill. Johnson, a former member of Trump's defense team during his first impeachment trial, has been a loyal follower of Trump. He was among the House Republicans that signed an amicus brief in support of a lawsuit attempting to overturn the 2020 election results. Johnson's election as Speaker ended a month-long Republican infighting. Trump initially flirted with the idea of becoming Speaker himself before supporting Jim Jordan. While Jordan was not elected, Trump was able to prevent the third Speaker candidate, Tom Emmer, from getting the position by denouncing him on Truth Social. Johnson was unanimously elected Speaker on December 13. Biden urges open lines in meeting with China's foreign minister. Bloomberg. President Joe Biden emphasized the need for responsible competition management and open communication during a meeting with China's foreign minister, Wang Yi. The meeting did not result in an announcement about a meeting between Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, but Biden has expressed hopes for such a meeting. The meeting between Biden and Wang lasted about an hour and also touched on global challenges and the passing of China's former Premier Li Keqiang. The U.S. and China have been working to set up a leaders' meeting, but China has not confirmed Xi's attendance. Brazil unlikely to hit 2024 zero-deficit target, Lula says. Yahoo! Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has cast doubt on the country's ability to achieve its zero-deficit target next year. Lula said he would not cut spending on priority projects to reach a goal he considers unnecessary. The comments mark a reversal of the government's fiscal strategy. Until recently, Finance Minister Fernando Haddad was pledging to balance Brazil's budget next year. Good on you for having a try, Albanese quizzed about the voice in U.S. The Sydney Morning Herald. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has outlined the challenges faced by the Indigenous Voice proposal during a visit to the United States. He cited the difficulty of changing the Australian Constitution and the campaign of misinformation against the Voice as key factors in its defeat. Albanese also highlighted previous failed proposals, such as just compensation and recognition of local government, to put the defeat in context. He said that people in general were positive and supportive of the government for attempting the constitutional change. Minister for Indigenous Australians Linda Burney said the government would take time to decide on next steps after the defeat, and emphasized the importance of community input in determining the way forward. Trump continues to flex his political muscle in Washington and beyond. Yahoo! Former U.S. President Donald Trump has consolidated his support among lawmakers and primary voters in the Republican Party, as he seeks the GOP nomination for the 2024 presidential elections. Trump's four criminal cases do not seem to be affecting his popularity, according to polls, while rivals for the nomination, such as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, have yet to make significant inroads. It's time to abolish our indentured servitude visa. Telegraph. The H-1B visa program in the United States, which allows skilled immigrants to work for specific employers, has been criticized for exploiting foreign workers and undercutting American workers. Many American companies rely on labor contractors known as body shops to provide them with H-1B workers, who are often rented out to large tech and financial firms. These foreign workers, predominantly young Indian men, make up a significant portion of the workforce in STEM and IT jobs. However, they are not necessarily highly skilled or talented workers, as evidenced by the fact that some American workers have been fired and forced to train their replacements. Additionally, the Department of Labor sets wage levels for H-1B workers that are below the local median wage, allowing companies to save on labor costs. The H-1B system also restricts the rights of foreign workers, as they are tied to their sponsors and cannot easily change jobs. The Biden administration has proposed some minor reforms to the program to address fraud and abuse, but critics argue that a merit-based point system, like those used in other countries, would be a fairer and more equitable approach to skilled immigration. For Gulf of Mexico federal tracts designated for wind power development by Biden administration. Associated Press. The Biden administration has designated 4 tracts of federal Gulf of Mexico waters for wind energy development. These tracts range in size from nearly 57,000 acres to over 495,000 acres, and have the potential to generate wind power for millions of homes. This announcement follows the first Gulf sale of leases for wind development earlier this year, which drew a modest bid of $5.6 million. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management will now issue a formal notice for a proposed lease sale, followed by a 60-day comment period. Hey there, folks! It's your friendly neighborhood 6 doctor here, reporting on all the latest news from the 6-dimensional universe. Let's dive right into it, shall we? First up, we have the U.S. urging humanitarian pauses in Gaza. After weeks of hesitation, the Biden administration is now pushing for these pauses to allow aid to enter Gaza and facilitate the release of hostages. It's a change in policy that shows the administration's commitment to addressing the humanitarian crisis in the region. Meanwhile, the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas has sparked a debate over the legality of Israel's actions. The UN Secretary General claims that Israel has violated international humanitarian law, but the US and Canada support Israel's right to defend itself. It's a complicated situation that raises questions about proportionality and civilian casualties. In other news, there are rumors that Hamas may release all the hostages it is holding, potentially leading to an end to the war. This could be a significant development that would satisfy Western officials and allow Hamas to claim a clear success. It would also put Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in a tough spot. Moving on to international relations, a former NATO commander has warned of a ladder of escalation between the US and Iran. While the chances of direct conflict are low, there is still a 10% chance that things could escalate. It's a reminder of the delicate balance in the region and the potential for wider conflict. Speaking of Iran, its proxies have fired back after US airstrikes targeting facilities used by the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. The situation is tense, and the US is sending additional warplanes and aircraft carriers to the region to prevent further conflict. Now, let's turn our attention to domestic news. The top federal prosecutor in Los Angeles has confirmed that he declined to bring tax charges against Hunter Biden, but insists it did not hamper the probe into the president's son. It's a reminder that the investigation is ongoing, and there is still much to uncover. In the wake of another mass shooting, a U.S. representative has reversed his opposition to a ban on assault-style weapons. However, President Biden's push for such a ban faces an uphill battle in a Republican-controlled House of Representatives. It's a reminder of the divide on gun control in the country. Shifting gears, Canada is facing an innovation problem that is hindering its economic growth and global competitiveness. The country's lack of investment in independent research and poor productivity are major challenges that need to be addressed. The authors of an op-ed in the Globe and Mail are calling for increased support for researchers and a comprehensive strategy to enhance competition and innovation. In economic news, consumer confidence in the U.S. has fallen despite the strong performance of the economy. It's a reminder that even with a low unemployment rate, people are still concerned about inflation and other factors that could impact their financial well-being. Now, let's take a look at some other headlines. Police in Maine are on the hunt for a man suspected of shooting 18 people. Brazilian President Lula has cast doubt on the country's ability to achieve its zero-deficit target next year. Australian Prime Minister Albanese has outlined the challenges faced by the Indigenous Voice proposal during a visit to the U.S. Former President Trump continues to flex his political muscle in Washington. And finally, the Biden administration has designated 4 tracts of federal Gulf of Mexico waters for wind energy development. Phew! That's a lot of news to cover, but I hope I've managed to summarize it for you in an entertaining and informative way. Now it's your turn. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any burning questions? Let's keep the discussion going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.